Good afternoon. If you please can take your seat.
Down to start the afternoon session and final session of this conference. I have with me today two photographers here on the stage, which might be surprising to some of you that work on animal welfare. And we have chairing this session Isabel Rodrigo. Isabel is from the city here, and I'm very pleased to see one of my school colleagues on stage. So she has become an amazing photographer, and she's the one that has directed the whole One Welfare photo contest that you've all seen the outcome of. So I would like to pass my thanks to Isabel for the wonderful job that she has done. So I would like you all to join me in thanking Isabel for her work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. With this, I'd like to hand over. So Isabel works as a photographer. She's done a lot of training with a number of high-caliber photographers. As Virginia says this morning, I don't know why I'm speaking in English, so apologies, translators. I will switch to Spanish. Mis disculpas.
Apologies, I've mixed the language and I didn't realize I was speaking in English and not in Spanish. I was saying that Isabel now has the floor. She's a professional photographer who has taken a lot of training and courses. He has won many awards, and she has been the director of the One Welfare photo contest. She's a member of the jury, and I give her the floor because she is going to be the moderator for the session of this afternoon. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome you to what we call the session of One Welfare and Photography. As Rebecca has already said, I am Isabel Rodrigo. I am a photographer by nature. And as a way of introduction, I will say that the session will have three parts. We will have a keynote and then some oral presentations. We will finish with what we call a fantastic science slam. If at any point you want to ask questions to the speaker, you can vote and write your questions. Then we will have some oral questions after the session, and you who are present here can ask your questions alive. If there are not responded questions, we will try to send them to the speaker so that he or she can have the opportunity to answer later. Before introducing our keynote speaker, I have to say that I am a photographer too, and although it is obvious nature inspires us all, we can capture the moments that nature offers, behavior, or the beauty of the changing of seasons. As photographers, we try to capture those instants so that an ephemeral moment can be eternal and transcendent, and this requires an intimate connection with a natural environment. And with all beings, both plants and animals that inhabit it, we can patiently observe nature to wait for the adequate moment and take the picture. It is not easy to do, because if we want to be true to what we have in front of us, or if we want to capture details that our senses cannot take, or something that can only be taken with a camera, then we will have to be patient. Our speaker is an expert on everything that I have just mentioned. He's passionate for nature, especially animals, since from a very young age, and he has always felt the need to capture what nature offers to us. He has revolutionized the pictures of animals with high technology techniques. He has developed large exhibitions, always including animals in freedom. His work is and has been received many awards in the most prestigious contest at an international level. For example, he has the Quiet Life Photographer of the Year. I, as a photographer, will always admire him as one of the most inspiring photographers, Mario Cea.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon to everyone. And now after that warm welcome, I don't know what to say, Isabel, but it's a true and an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Part of what is my job, I would like to tell you a bit more. But first of all, and yesterday I was talking with Rebecca and Isabel about this as well. Maybe this is a bit too much for me because in my workshops, when I give a speak, I talk about photographical technique, how to make the photos, what do you have to do to have them, what are the best lenses, the best cameras. And what I really wanted to say here is to switch the focus and talk about how, through creative photography, which is precisely the type of photography that I like to create, this kind of photography that takes a step forward and does something more than just a documentary photography, how can we use it to create awareness so that everyone can understand a little bit better how we need to take care of the wild animals in the world. After all, they are our own allies to achieve so much that will actually benefit humans. As I was saying, I always try to create photography that goes a step further than documentary photography, because you can find documentary photography in any guidebook or encyclopedia. Precisely because I do believe that the photography that calls our attention a little bit more is that will allow the public to stop just for a minute to look at the habitat or the species or the issues that species might be having in the world that we live in today, where we're constantly being bombarded by images. When one image has a visual impact on you that makes you stop even for a second to look at it, I think that's precisely what inspires my work, because that's what I want to do, to achieve other things with it. So I'm going to try, by using images, to tell you, and I'm going just to choose photos from 3 or 4 species, but I'm going to try to tell you how wildlife can help us, how these images can make people be more aware of some of the things that we want them to know. All of these are photographs of wildlife, free animals. And all of the images are photos that I've taken with my camera. I haven't used any kind of IT, artificial intelligence, or any of the other mumbo-jumbo that is so popular today. In photography, I've been quite pure. I want my image to be complete and finished by using just photographic techniques. So this is a very common kind of bird in many parts of the world, specifically here in Spain. We see it in the summer mostly. Well, it arrives in spring till the end of summer. It lives here during the reproductive cycle and then moves back to Africa. This is, again, a very common bird in our towns and small villages, even in some cities, where this bird goes looking for shelter in abandoned houses, all parts of small rural towns, and has a very important function. It plays a key role controlling many insect plague that would be very damaging for human beings. And here you can see it, bringing some food to one of the chickens. And here they tend to have 2 or 3 times the reproductive period. So they get a lot of of insects that they need to feed the family, because they lay all these eggs, and so they breed a lot of these. And once I've taken a couple of photos, documentary ones, yes, because they're documenting their lives, there's also for example, we have here this bird that is leaving this winter from the window from the shelter that is an abandoned house. And there's also the fact that here this image is telling us to respect these old houses. We have here the shallow, because it's precisely where a lot of these animals actually live and find shelter. These kind of images, another shallow here, that is basically leaving this trail on his wake. What we see is basically that people will be interested in waiting for a second to see, what is this? What species of bird is this? How did they make this photo? And if you add a bit of text explaining that this species has some issues and concerns, it will be more interesting. And this is another image that we had a terrible summer where there were several wildfires that destroyed a lot of forests and a lot of tree areas. And at that time, maybe the image made more sense than today. But at that time, what I was feeling was that I needed to show how wildfires, most of them caused by humans, can consume and destroy not only hectares of vegetation, but also the houses and the shelters of all these animals. And this is another beautiful animal. This is a night owl. And I love this kind of birds, these birds of prey, because I worked for years with one of these birds, and it was telling me a lot about what they do in the nature and how they behave. And I'll tell you a story at the end, something that happened to me. All of these birds of prey, specifically this night owl, are connected to humans because it tends to put its nest in the towers of the churches, in old abandoned houses. And that's why we have the same issue like with swallows. This is another animal that tends to nest in human environments, and for that reason we need to respect those spaces so that this animal will survive. It eats rodents, another important plague for humans, especially in this country. And I always try to connect the species with its environment, and in this case you will see that they tend to live in ruins, in human buildings, and there's always this creativity that will attract the viewer's eye so that they will pay a little bit more of attention to this photo. This is an animal completely linked to humans because tends to go frequently to the old barns. In fact, in England, they call it the barn owl because they tend to live in barns a lot. Because there's a lot of mice and rats in barns, they go there to eat part of the crops that are stored there, and the owl goes to eat the rodents. And they don't tend to get a lot of good press amongst humans because owls have always been considered to death in our stories. At least our storytellers used to connect it. You could hear the owls in the towers of the near to the bells of the church, and there was something eerie about the sound of an owl at night. And maybe due to those old wives' tales, this was not a very positive considered animal, but that was maybe the reason why it was persecuted for a time. But I think it's part of our duty as photographers to show the rest of the people that they're wrong and that this is an ally. You will see that in the last slide, if it wants to work, but it doesn't seem to want to. Oh, sorry. I just moved too fast. Let's go back. I've already done some spoilers about the next one. Sorry about that. But I didn't want to lose the opportunity. This is the one that I wanted to show. Here you can see I wanted to tell you a story while I was taking the photographs of these birds of prey. It had a mouse had just hunted, and this is a bit more of an artistic photography because I was trying to get again that effect of the light on its wake, to get all the details, and this is a very fast movement. But I was doing it because I was trying to make this photo. And this was in a cereal crop area, and there was a dried tree there, an olive tree, in fact. Not an olive tree, sorry. Holm oak. And this was an oak that have 3 fledglings. And when you get to this kind of dried holm oaks, well, it was just an obstacle for the farmers. And so they wanted to cut it down because it was in the middle. They were going to make wood out of it. And it was just an obstacle that has to be taken off the field. But I took some photos and I went straight to the owners of those fields to explain to them that inside that tree, dried up tree, the owl had all these chicks inside, and I did some figures, some numbers based on the statistics that I gathered by being there several nights. And every single day, that owl hunted approximately 30 mice. And I told it to the owner, and I explained it to her. And when she realized that she had the best mice killer ever, and she didn't need to use any kind of poisons or chemical solutions to control these mice, she was very happy. And she said, what do you need to keep that owl there and to keep that tree there? Because sometimes not everyone needs to know everything. The issues of what these birds go through or the issues of a specific field. But if someone comes and explains and takes some photos and some numbers, I think people tend to want to take care of the environment. People don't choose destruction as the first option, but they need to know. And now, this is another species. Well, my photos in the end have been made in a very similar way. I have a very particular style, trying to capture specific moments, difficult moments to see with a naked human eye. This is a kingfisher, which is a bird that keeps on evolving and lives near rivers and flowing water. And it's always affected by the contamination of the water of the rivers, of the lakes, of the ponds. Purity of water is key for this animal to survive. And again, it's a great ally because it controls an invasive species, a very dangerous one, which is a small kind of fish that proliferates a lot, and it will basically take the space of any other things, and it's what we call the mosquito fish or gambusia, and the kingfisher eats them. And so we've been the cause of this invasion because we brought them here. We brought these species, and it just got out of control. This is a kind of bird that destroys this mosquito fish and helps us with this plague issue that we created. I like to use different formats to make how things can look different. It looks like a butterfly instead of a kingfisher because it has these feathers in the wings, but still everything that I'm showing you here has not been processed. It's just been made by the camera. And in many of the workshops that I teach, what I want photographers to understand is that we can do this with just a camera. We don't need software to do so, to get these results. Of course, this could create the illusion. I don't know how to call it, but yes, illusion and a motivation, and to bring you some excitement to go out into the field to take some pictures. I don't know, sometimes it's a bit more complicated than a documentary image, but I think that the visual impact it can offer is also really relevant when you want to explain the story of the issues these environment or these species are suffering. And for that reason, they're important. Another animal that I don't think is getting the best of press lately, bats. We tend to be scared of them. I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it's because of Dracula films or Batman films. But in general, we tend to cringe when we hear about bats. It's true that they have their own issues, as any other series. They can transmit diseases, the rabies, and the possibility of getting bitten by a bat is really, really small. So the issues should not appear. But this photo, just a casual image, I was just making some photos at night, and I took this image where there was a huge group of bats living there, and in one of them I found this. So we get this moment when the bat is going for his favorite dish. You can see it in the center of the photo. So clearly the bat is going to have dinner. So this happens every single night, every single day, 1 million times. They eat and eat and eat mosquitoes and spiders. Mosquitoes are a big issue for humans. So once I've made these photos, I tried to find something more creative to show that these are animals that also have a lot to do with human environments. This one, for example, was getting out of an abandoned house through the broken window. Again, I think it's important to keep these habitats there. Otherwise, these species will have to move, and in the end, they will disappear. So there, without them, we will face a lot of issues. Another species, I'm going to change a bit of the kind of species, if you like. Obviously, all animals have something good to offer to nature, and they are there for a reason. Some, nonetheless, a little bit more for different reasons. They've been persecuted by men, and if you add to those issues, survival issues, that persecution, they also have to survive other issues as well, like hunters or being run over by cars in a road. This is also part of the problem, and I wanted to mention it as well. Foxes, the red foxes, which is pretty common here in Spain, has been an animal that has been persecuted, is still persecuted. It's allowed to, by law to hunt it, and because during a period of time these were animals that could pass rabies, well, there was a reason behind that possibility to hunt them, but not anymore. So they're just hunting them for that because they are not being used for fur or for meat or for any other reason. It's a beautiful animal. It can move around any kind of surface, and it also eats a lot of mice, a lot of rodents. So it helps us as well. Look at this photo. I took it in a road some time ago, and I found this recently killed fox, and I wanted to show it with some creative effects so that people will pay attention to what we're doing. Well, not me. This is an issue that the wildlife is having because they need to evolve in this habitat. They are night creatures, and they cross a lot of high roads, and a lot of these animals die there. It would be necessary to be more aware of this situation and to indicate in some areas that they need to be more cautious and to be careful. And the authorities should include more spaces so animals could cross the roads from one field to another without the need to cross using the roads, because for them they are fatal. And that's another kind of photographs that I like to do a lot, and I tend to practice it a lot as well. And I'm going to conclude with this. I love to show animals in their own natural habitat. I think the most relevant thing we can do is to achieve that those habitats, all of them, where animals live, evolve, where they have their whole life cycle, they should be protected and have an adequate level of conservation. If the habitat is okay, animals will be okay as well. So for that reason, I do believe that through the wildlife photography, sometimes it's difficult to show how much we love the environment. It's not easy to do that, to include them in the forefront, adding the habitat as well. When you want those habitats to be well protected, it's easier to just make landscape photography. There you have the opportunity of showing up close the different issues that landscapes have. I talked with Isabel how the pollution in the rivers, in the beach, the trees that have been cut, the spills, the dumping of these chemical spills into all these water sources. And if you want to add the animals, it tends to have a greater impact. So we know that these species live in a very specific space precisely because of the good quality of the habitat. And that is also a way of calling to attention the viewer. It could be during the day, like that aquatic bird that tends to escape the human eye. So it has to be living in a very clear place, or this feline here in the forest, this civet cat, or this little bird which lives completely in the mountains, in the forest that you can find in the mountains. This is a blue nutak, and it's a pleasure to see it evolve. Or these rooms, again, where you can find a lot of these animals, more than you can even imagine. They live there all their lives, inside these old churches that have been abandoned or different places. They can find all the nooks and crannies where they could just leave their nest or hide and live peacefully in these old chapels abandoned in the fields. So places that we can consider an obstacle or something that is just in the way, but we need to talk to people so that they will understand that by preserving these spaces, by showing these images, they will understand that the owners of those rooms, of those abandoned spaces, can keep them to maintain the lives of these animals. So, in the end, this is nothing more than images that show us a little bit of the habitat of these animals with a special point of view, where you can, as a part of the viewers, can stop for a second to look at this image. We have, for example, this bird. What kind of bird would this be? Let's look, let's research, and maybe this is the way I've tried to, with my passion with this photography, to give a sense, to find a way of helping all these animals. Without them, our passions would make no sense, because we will not be able to take pictures at night without these natural habitats, without these spaces protected by them, and they will not be there to be photographed. So with this last slide, I will conclude here by saying that there's another important aspect to take into consideration in photography, and we've been very lucky to have that, which is a photographic contest, precisely because to be part of this kind of contest is important, to have your own photos and to show them around the world, to let people see them, but the contests as well have an important role, which is your images will reach a lot more people than you would do on your own. To be able to show your photographies in the shortlist as winners in this contest, they will be there, and people will understand the problems and the issues of these animals. And this is one of the main objectives of any contest, not only to give a prize and to have a lovely prize award gala, but to show the images that might have a greater impact precisely for the contest, because they will reach a lot more people. And so more people will know more about these issues of these habitats or these species. So without further ado, I would like to conclude here. And I don't know if anyone has any questions. Anyone wants to make questions? Yes, please. I found it beautiful. Thank you, Mario. It was beautiful photographs. It was very exciting to see them. I wanted to ask you, because not that long ago, I heard a colleague saying that talking with a farmer in the UK, they have a lot of issues with people that just go into the fields with their dogs, and their dogs might attack sheep or any animals, or there can be parasites that come with the urban dogs. And so this farmer has decided to add information, not just like signs saying keep your dog on a leash. They had keep your dog on a leash because we have these animals. If your dog is not on a leash, this might happen, or this landscape might change. And so I wonder have you tried to convince the owner of a farm to use your images to create more awareness? I haven't done it actually, but it's a great idea, because sometimes it's the lack of information what makes you make things that you shouldn't be doing. Like when I was talking about the owls in a tree in the middle of the field, the farmers wanted to take and cut this tree out because they had no idea that the owl was nesting there or what the owl was doing for them. So they were just thinking about cutting the tree, making some wood, and they will keep on with their crops. But once you explain it, once you put information there, national parks are protected and they do that. But privately, I don't think so much. So I'm going to take a note of that because it's a good idea. Sometimes it could help. There, this is your photo now. And now you will understand the issues in this area. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Because we're running out of time, we're going to thank you again and congratulate you. Sara Claudia Herrera Garcia says, the photos are spectacular. Thank you for sharing them with us. And Juan Carlos Ramirez Lopez says, that was a great presentation. The photos were amazing. And I want to say that I could be watching your photos and always be very excited and moved by them. Thank you.
Yes. Vamos a continuar.
Let's move on with the next presentation.
Continuamos con las presentaciones.
We continue with the oral presentations, and I have the pleasure to introduce the keynote called A Photograph is a Lot of Behaviors, and let's make use of photography to change behaviors. Cortney Price is an expert on behavioral science, so welcome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And what an honor and difficult task it is to follow Mario Sea with his moving photos, his powerful oratory. And I may say, perhaps even that was a behavior change intervention for us that we experienced just now. So with that in mind, I'm really excited to talk about what is a behavior change intervention, how do we design it, what can we better understand about visual communication and its role in behavior change. So how many behaviors is a picture worth? How can we use behavioral science to better design, test, and build evidence around behavior change? So, coming after Mario, I don't need to say this. This isn't a surprise. Photography is really powerful. And it transports us to some place that we aren't currently. We sometimes feel like we are the person we see in a tranquil setting. We may feel emotions we see in another face. We may be happy. We may even laugh. We may even be afraid. And some photographs even make us start creating narratives. I'm trying to remember what I did wrong to make this guy so angry at me. So, photographs with people are very powerful. Of course, photographs, as we've seen from Mario, and I'll go quickly through this part because his was much better. Animal and other environmental photographs are very powerful too. Here's just a few images that Mario already presented. Photojournalistic photos also can be very powerful. And also, interestingly, without more context, we start to create a narrative around what's happening here. We might feel pain for this elephant. We might imagine an evil and horrible circus owner. A lot of things happen without context, but that might stir a lot of emotions in us. This, on the other hand, there's a lot of vets present in the audience. I'm sure many people know what has just happened. If you haven't, I'll clue you in. This couple of lions has been mating for several hours, every 15 minutes during mating season in Masai Mara in Kenya. It feels like a very intimate situation, but if we zoom out, it's not so intimate actually. There's a lot of people watching, including myself, so I took that photo. Photos can also be misleading depending upon the context. Photos don't need to be real either. With artificial intelligence, we can generate very interesting pseudo-photographs, and I fully take on board Mario's points about using the camera and the art of photography to really demonstrate the reality of things. it's also interesting to explore the artificial reality of what it might look like. For example, this is NotCo's pretty powerful campaign about imagining animals, production animals growing to their more natural age. Pigs getting older, cows not being retired so early. We have an emotional reaction to this, an immediate one. We start to think, oh, isn't it sad that we don't allow cows to live a long, healthy life? But I was having a really interesting conversation with several people, including Dale and others, the other day, and if we tried to imagine a world in which cows were allowed to live a long life, would we be asking bovine owners to keep them as pets? That'd be an expensive pet, might destroy your living room. Also, if we release them into the wild, it might be difficult to see them surviving very long. So what I'm trying to get the point at, photos don't quite often really come with a very large logical explanation. They touch our heartstrings, they are emotional, but we often maybe create a story that needs more background and more logic to be complete. What about visuals? Well, no matter where you are in the world and whether or not you speak English, you probably know what that means. Likewise, graphic design is telling us what to do, what not to do. It's warning us even about some extremely scary things. And it's giving us very interesting and relatively easily understood graphics of what could happen if we do something. So the consequences of behavior. Maybe this makes us want to slow down to avoid this. This is a photograph near my hometown. I didn't take it, but it's a photograph of Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, which has a very, very famous stretch of road, beautiful stretch of road, lots of songs written about it, but there's a curve that's particularly dangerous. And at that curve, people flip their cars quite often, but a lot less than they used to in the past because they did this. Not a picture of a car flipping, not a warning sign, but stripes on the ground, horizontal stripes which get closer to each other the closer the road gets to the curve. This creates an optical illusion when you're driving that these bands of white are disappearing under your car with increasing rapidity even if you're slowing down. That makes you want to slow down more, and that has saved lives. So that's visual design that has no easily understood physical corollary. Okay, let's leave traffic and go somewhere. There's another type of traffic, bathrooms. This is a pretty famous example of using visual design to try to change behavior. And if we zoom in on this urinal, we'll see a sticker that looks like a fly. This is from Amsterdam Airport. And I think maybe half of the audience is not as familiar with this as the other. I'm not sure why, but this is pretty famous and very powerful example of how we can reduce, quote, spillage, and also therefore reduce use of water and detergent used to clean up spillage. So we're saving time, money, and also the environment. There is an animal welfare aspect, and then there has been criticism of the idea of, are we training people to try to target flies in some liquid way? And therefore later iterations including candles, like you're trying to put out the candle, a target, a bowling ball, etc. And all of these have had behavioral effects that have been positive. So visual design used in a very interesting context. What happens when we try to combine all these ideas? Photos, images, people, slogans. Well, whether you love them or you hate them, PETA have been very successful in using shock advertising, getting attention, grabbing your attention out of the normal, and making you focus on what they want you to focus on. Now, the behavior change goal may not be super clear. Do we really want people to not eat any meat ever again, any animals? That may be the explicit goal, but one thing's for sure, PETA really wants you to click on their website, follow their social media feed, engage, comment, donate. So behavior change goals may not be the ones that are stated, or let's say they might not be priorities, and they've definitely succeeded in some of those later priorities in building a brand. We have words that also rhyme, try to relate to who's on your plate, and this also evokes a sense of empathy. Are we starting to understand or associate ourselves somehow with the animal we're about to eat or consume? So, interesting idea about how these things come together. Graphic design also means understanding where you're putting text. So this is a famous example that may have increased drug use in schools. We're not for sure, but it definitely was, those pencils were recalled as soon as people started criticizing them. As you consume the pencil, the slogan changes. So I guess the more studious students learn a different version of the message later on. So we're getting to some interesting frictions here between how we interpret words, language, visuals, graphic design, and to kind of bring it all home and understand this friction, I'd like to do an experiment with all of you. That's going to require us doing something we haven't done a lot of, which is speaking out loud. And those of us online, please freak out your roommate or family by speaking really loudly so they'll be confused as to why you're yelling at your computer. Okay, so what I want you to do is when I display a color on the screen, I'd like you to say the name of the color, okay? And for the audience here, let's use Spanish, en español, por favor. So just speak. As soon as you notice the color, say the name. Everybody ready? I see some nodding. Vale, okay, here we go. Verde, azul, rojo. Oh, what happened? That's red, everybody. The color is red, right? But there's something going on in your brain. There's some kind of conflict. This is called the Stroop test, a very famous psychological experiment demonstrating this idea that we have multiple processes happening in how we interpret stimuli. And it's not always so easy. Sometimes these types of stimuli conflict. So this is something we need to think about when we're designing our visual communication. We need to have compatible versions of these stimuli. And even if you're an English speaker, you're looking at this next image, you may feel some discomfort. Sometimes having this strange cognitive dissonance, we call it, can be powerful because it can make you notice something. Feeling uncomfortable can also be a part of your behavior change strategy. Okay, so what's happening? Why did we say azul instead of rojo? Why are we sometimes emotionally reacting to other images and others don't bother us at all? A way to talk about this or describe this is the tale of two systems, or the dual system theory of cognition, dual process model, popularized by Daniel Kahneman and others, but it's been around a long time, perhaps even since David Hume. We have system one on the left, that's our Homer, automatic, quick, emotional, reactive, not thinking a whole lot. And system two on the right, Spock, is our logic, our rational system, our thoughtful and plotting mechanism for trying to get to the correct answer. Now, the key thing to remember is that these two systems are not created equal. Homer's really, really fast, really brash, really active. Spock is quite absent, or it takes a lot of energy for him to be active. He's slow and tired a lot of the time. So the result happens that Homer's quite often driving the bus. He's quite often in charge of our daily decisions. A lot of times we use shortcuts, heuristics. These shortcuts, if ingrained, can become cognitive biases. We might think a certain type of person is not worth our time, or a certain neighborhood is something not worth visiting, or a certain animal is not worthy of respect. These shortcuts are part of who we are and can be rewritten, but a lot of times they just need to be lived with and understood, and we can leverage them to affect behavior. One thing's for sure, we like to imagine we are more rational and logical than we actually are. Most of the time we're on autopilot. And this is why it's really interesting. So many of the objectives of our communication campaigns are, we want to inform people. We want to build knowledge. We want to raise awareness. Yes, that's really important, but not at the expense of Homer, because he's not really reacting to those things so much. And if he's in charge, we need to think about him as well as Spock. So, we can sum up by saying automatic behavior making is par for the course. This information-based logical transfer, it's important, but it's probably not as critical. And when we think about graphics, photographs, and design, we need to cater to that automatic system, but we also need to avoid friction with system two, make sure Spock is on board. So, how do we design our visual communication around evidence of what works? We use applied behavioral science. Now, what is behavioral science? It's really, put simply, the study of behavior. What drives it, how it works, what keeps it from happening, and how we can use those factors to influence behavior. It's a multidisciplinary approach. In fact, I like to say behavioral science isn't really a thing. It's a combination or an amalgamation of many sciences, but it's used all in the purpose of understanding how people work and how they make decisions. It's also a rigorous methodology. It's really a scientific method for building a hypothesis and testing it and really having evidence of why something is going to influence behavior or not. And trying to keep our own Homer in check, our intuition, when we say, that's a beautiful photograph, let's put it on our campaign. We need to have evidence of why we're going to do that. Is our photograph addressing a barrier? Now, Mario said something very interesting about the homeowner or barn owner, I can't recall, who was afraid of the barn owl, right? And I'm from the States, we call them barn owls. They're very, they have owls have a myth around them as well as they're night creatures. And in this case, information was really powerful for that homeowner to be able to understand the benefit that that animal gave to that owner. But in some cases, that information may not be so useful. That fear might be so strong. Think about cigarette front of pack labels. They don't really seem to work. People know that cigarettes cause cancer. People know the dangers. They even see very graphic images, and change doesn't happen. So there is something there around information, but we need to think about what else is there and generate evidence. So, putting it simply, behavioral science says if you want someone to do something, make it easy. If you don't want them to do it, make it hard. Context around decisions, physical, psychological, and social environment are sometimes more influential than knowledge, attitude, or intention. Just think about how many times you told yourself you were going to go to the gym, or stop eating cookies, or do anything else that's better for you. We aren't always doing what's best for us, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's something we need to grapple with and wrestle with. We've talked about the COM-B model. Jessica and others brought it up. A very powerful and important way to collect this very big body of knowledge that is behavioral insights. I like the EAST framework from the Behavioral Insights team as an entry point for early adopters. It's essentially a way to think about what we've learned about behavioral science in the past 15 years or so. If you want someone to do something, make it easy. How is the behavior difficult? How can you alleviate that difficulty? Make it easier? What's time got to do with it? The sequence of behaviors. Often a behavior that you want to change is actually one part of a chain. So you got to think about the whole sequence. Maybe the behavior starts in the morning and doesn't end till evening. It's sustained. Maybe you need reminders. Time is really a factor, so when something happens matters. Is what you're asking people to do counter-normative? Does it go against the social norms or cultural norms of your population? If it does, it's going to be very hard. Can you use social norms to point out that the majority does something that you're not doing? That's very motivating to change. And finally, can you make your behavior change intervention attractive? And I don't mean, oh, I really like it. I mean, do I notice it? Does it grab my attention like that PETA protest did? Many social scientists in the room will say, big deal, we've seen this before, this is old wine in new bottles. What's the big news, buddy? And I would say you're right, it's not necessarily new. But the fact that we're trying to use it in a systematic way through a stepwise methodology, and more scientists are trying to use it in this way to build more and more evidence, that's what's really valuable and strategic here. And that's why we're talking about behavioral science as a whole. This stepwise methodology is built around, the easiest way to think about it is define, diagnose, design, and test. So you define your intervention in terms of what you want people to do. Observable behavior, not necessarily what they understand or feel or intend, but what could you quantify them doing? What's the change you want to see? In Mario's example, once again, we want this owner not to use pesticides to kill rats, or not to chase away bats, or these specific behaviors we would want. We need to then see the barriers to the behavior. Is the person afraid of something? Are there heuristics or biases happening? Are there mental shortcuts? Is it just hard physically to do the thing you want to do in a slaughterhouse with time pressure, with very difficult conditions? Is animal welfare just very hard? We might like to think that it's a person's fault, and we can ascribe blame all you want, and there are people at fault all the time for horrible actions. But the environment we design can probe and push people to do the wrong thing. And if we're not investing in that environment, we're making it harder for people to do the thing we want them to do. Finally, once we have these barriers in mind, we design our behavior change communication with the diagnosis in mind. If we're not addressing a barrier, then our behavior change intervention needs to be rethought. If a photograph that shocks people and helps them understand something they didn't know, makes them empathize or something else, that's great if those are the barriers to the action. Finally, we don't just run it and print it and go for it. We need to test it. We need to run rigorous trials. We need to use evidence. Quick and fast and frugal testing is okay too. When we can, we try to randomize, we try to control. We need evidence of what works, and we need to iterate on it. So, how do we do this in practice? I'll give you a few examples of actual pilots we have been running in FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization where I work. They're not specifically on animal or environmental welfare, they're connected, but I want to use them because they're very practical and they have design in mind. And then we'll talk about a hypothetical example on animal welfare. The first step is define. So, this is an example of a problem. People in FAO headquarters are not sorting their garbage accurately. I would say that's an understatement looking at that photo. Why are they doing this? Well, first we need to understand, what do you mean sorting accurately? And in this case, we say we want you to put the coffee cups in the coffee cup bin, the organic cups in the organic bin. So you have some very specific behaviors. When it comes to one welfare, they're going to be more complex, but we can still identify them. Maybe we don't want you to litter into the environment. Maybe we don't want you to knock down an old house that is the home of many, many important animals, etc. So in this case, we defined the behavior as sorting accurately. Then we went to diagnose the barriers. Intuition told a lot of people that the reason my colleagues weren't sorting the garbage accurately, and I mentioned my colleagues, of course, I always sort my garbage accurately. Just kidding, no, I also fall prey to the problem. It wasn't because the people don't care about the environment. This was the gut reaction. Oh, people don't care, they don't really have an intention, they have a bad attitude, we need to change mindset. But what we found was the vast majority of people really did care. In fact, part of the reason they're working for the UN and the FAO is to try to save the planet. So when structure and process made it hard for them to recycle accurately, they actually had a negative impact on their well-being. So it wasn't because they were lazy or silly or wrong, it's because they have too much to do. The design of the choice architecture, or the words and labels, etc., were not consistent. The placement was inconvenient. Most people throw their coffee cup away when they're coming from lunch to their desk. And if they have to go an extra mile, that's difficult. We have a building that houses 3,000 people, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of barriers cause what's called cognitive load, and you get what's called the what the heck effect. I can't really do it, I'm busy, I throw it away and I feel bad. So how do we look at the situation? This is the standard package design, and this was the treatment. Taking the barriers in mind, how do we make it more attractive? How do we make it easier? How do we make it more obvious? So we standardized, we use images based on lots of interviews and focus group discussions. What are the problem articles? And also a really dirty garbage audit. So going into the waste and counting everything. I can't remember how much, a ton of waste that we went through. I say we, but others did, and I'm grateful for their hard work. At the end of this, we did an online experiment, randomized controlled trial involving over 1,600 people, and we found that the treatment made it twice as likely for someone to accurately sort their waste. So easy, obvious, attractive. Now we're going to be rolling this out, doing some physical testing, but the results online were so robust that we're pretty confident it's going to make a big difference and perhaps even reduce our carbon footprint. Let's look at a slaughterhouse. In Mozambique, we did a pilot with 4 different slaughterhouses, 2 control and 2 treatment. The problem, define. What's the problem? People are essentially not always following hygiene protocols. Places in the slaughterhouse that should be clean are dirty. Places that are dirty should be clean. Actually, that's not the case, it's just dirty. And you know, there's time pressure, and I'm sure there's animal welfare issues as well. We didn't look at them directly. We then went to co-create with, co-diagnose with slaughterhouse workers. What are your problems? Walk us through your day. Help us understand frictions. And we mapped out a process, the current process, and found out where there were problems. Currently, I don't have a bucket, I do have a bucket. Buckets aren't really clearly labeled. I'm always borrowing my friend's bucket, etc. There was a lot there, but to simplify, we found that buckets and a coordinated process that indicated by buckets in color and in graphic design would alleviate the frictions. And these colors were chosen by the Mozambican slaughterhouse workers, and the graphic design was co-created with them. So they said what they would react to. And then we put this in practice. Before-after trial, with placement strategically located around the slaughterhouses and observational data being collected as well as self-reports, we found by and large behavior did change. We did have some challenges when we did observational data that was unannounced versus announced, so you have social desirability bias, definitely in practice, but we saw overall a positive effect, and we had people really excited about using behavioral design to try to help fix their environment, make it easier for them to do their job, because they want to keep the place clean. And this is our team. I'll run through just really quickly another example. On farmer field schools, which is like a test bed for agroecology FAO uses, a big challenge for farmers in general, not just in farmer field schools, is stepping in disinfectant foot baths regularly to keep poultry houses clean. And guess what? The barrier wasn't people don't know or people don't care. It was people are busy. People are not sure why they don't do it. In fact, farmers said, can you help us remember to do it? Well, it turns out the barrier is something called psychological distance. The detriment of not stepping in the foot bath happens way in the future. It's far away from us. But the action is required in the present and habitually. When my baby's crying, when I'm late to the market, when I have other things to do, when I'm rushing, and also I just don't want to get my feet wet. That doesn't feel nice. So what the farmers did, together with behavioral scientists, was co-create what looks like a classic communication campaign of some sort, but it's actually a comic designed by local artists in concert with the Ghanaian farmers, and a slogan that shortens the psychological distance. A day without foot bath results in days without profit. So that commitment is present in mind, and you step in the foot bath more. And this really resulted in change. I'll end on something that for us to ponder, how we might partner together more, how we as a community might try to tap into behavioral science more regularly and systematically when we think about our campaigns, our visual communication. If we say that we want, on animal cruelty, our first gut reaction might be, okay, the behavior change is we want this guy to stop hitting his dog. Okay, that's obvious. But let's say that this is a really complex psychological problem. We don't have a whole lot of information about this gentleman, nor does he want to share information with us. And his situation may be very different from the other. We may want to work on the actual abusers, but we also may want to think about bystanders, community. Why aren't people speaking up when this is happening? Maybe the behavior change could be making it less okay to do this, making it more likely for someone to step up and say stop or to call out bad behavior. That's a behavior too. So maybe we think, so this hypothetically, let's say our target is not this gentleman, but it's his community. So we want them to speak out. There might be barriers. It might be normal in this community to see animals in poor conditions. We might be numb to problems like this. Also, the classic community cohesion and different systems and structures may be absent. People may not be working together so much. So there might be a difficulty there. To address this, we could try to use different techniques to try to overcome some of these barriers. One of the things that you reacted to in those earlier photos was human faces. Well, animal faces matter too. In fact, there's plenty of research showing pretty much the same effect happens. We focus on eyes, we look at mouths and noses, we really fixate on faces. So if people are, in the first barrier, people are numb, they're looking at large amounts of animals, so there's a concept called psychic numbing. The bigger the number, the less we care. It's how genocide happens. We don't think in big numbers, we think in micro cases. If we can make a dog's plight personal and empathetic and leverage what we know about, this is eye tracking, we can test how people look at the dog in our image. We can fine tune it so people will pay a lot of attention to it. Secondly, on the bystander effect, we could maybe look at how to alleviate that by thinking about building empathy, but also using photography for its very emotional impact in terms of helping people use their anger for productivity. If we think about what keeps a community together, communities are built on norms. And if someone's breaking a norm, it might make us angry and want to intervene. The bystander effect happens when a lot of people are around and we don't do anything because we think someone else should. So if we want to get over that kind of hump, we might want to trigger this idea of anger and of community cohesion and need to protect our norms. This is something that already exists, a campaign or a visual image from PETA. Now, I'm not promoting PETA. I don't know if this worked. I don't know how they test their images, but there's a really good idea around, especially the face of the dog. The dog is really focused on a face. It's focused on humans being able to project emotion onto that face and connect with it. And then the slogan is about community. It's about protection. It's about respect. So the anger and anguish that are the Homer Simpson reaction, we give Spock something he can do about it. I can speak up and help stop this. And you could imagine an entire campaign that gives people options, makes commitments, publicly professing that next time I see something, I'll do something. So we need to bundle our image with our behavioral ask. And then we need to test it. How we might test it, we could easily do focus groups, we could do online experiments, and we could even do field-based experiments. We can use what's called a lab in the field. If that community is so specific, we can take iPads, games, and we can use those different tools that social science allows us to use to test people's willingness to change and have better ideas on what type of image might help them overcome those barriers. We need to be careful, however, of what's called spillover effects, and particularly negative spillovers. If we make it more normal and we plaster the town with images of beaten dogs, we could be contributing to numbing. We could be making it less impactful to actually see that image. So we need to think about that and test for it. Fantastic example that didn't test for it is called Scared Straight. It was a program in the 70s around trying to motivate young delinquent high school boys to be less crime prone. So their plan was, we're going to invite these kids into a prison and they're going to be exposed to a convict who's going to talk all about his experiences and scare them so much that they're not going to want that future for themselves. Well, what ended up happening was, those experiences were pretty exciting and the convict's life sounded pretty powerful and respected, and he was a respected member of his community in the prison, and crime actually went up. So, test. We need to test, we need to iterate and test again. Drawing some conclusions, I'm basically making the argument that we can use behavioral science and especially the stepwise methodology for diagnosing, designing, and testing interventions. It could become part of our normal day-to-day. It doesn't always have to be super rigorous. It could also be just a lens that we use to see the world. We could use it to help us remember that we're not always rational, and people may not change just by us giving them information. We need to be more creative and more strategic, and most of all, we need to build our visual communication on evidence of what works. So we need to define our behavior that we want to change. We need to diagnose really what's wrong with it, and our visual communication needs to answer that diagnosis with a really attractive, interesting design that we then go test, iterate on, and evaluate. And if we can co-design with the community itself, like we did with the slaughterhouse workers or others, then we have co-ownership. And then we're building an opportunity for all of us to contribute to change. We're not imposing change, we're co-creating change. Thanks so much for your time, and really appreciate, open to any questions. And thanks again to Mario for your inspiration.
Muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias al señor Cortney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price, for an incredible presentation. And now we're going to continue with the these incredible sessions now, the fantastic OVSM, One Welfare SM presentations, but we still have time for a question. Well, first of all, thank you. That was a great presentation. Just two very brief questions. In my country, we have this saying that can be translated as the worst kind of blind person is the one that doesn't want to see. So how can we change deniers, those that says climate change doesn't exist, animals are not a risk? And my second question, what do you think about ironic consumption?
Thank you so much for your question. A challenging one to answer succinctly, and definitely there's much more esteemed experts out there that could give a better job. But to give an intro to how we could approach the problem, my overarching answer is that our gut reaction, our intuition is, what is our intervention? How can we fix it? And what worked down the street or in Colombia or in Buenos Aires, and can we copy that and into our new problem? Where did we see climate action happening before? How could we use that? But what I'm advocating for is let's copy the process for designing the intervention, not the actual intervention itself. And the process really gets is how we answer your question. Do we know why people are believing or following misinformation? Do we know how easy it is to get misinformation and how hard it is to get reliable information? Are we understanding trust dynamics? And we can only do that by studying the population we want to work with for change. So around misinformation and disinformation, this is my caveat. My caveat is we need to test, we need to experiment, we need to design together. But there have been pretty interesting advancements in what's called pre-bunking, where people are exposed to truth and fact-based information before they see misinformation, and this has led to marginal resilience and what people are calling inoculation to misinformation. So you could think about how would you build a campaign that directly answers the, doesn't debunk, but puts actively information out there that is related to the misinformation streams you're seeing. How could you also work with social media companies to make it more, to help activate Spock when we're about to post? Most studies show that we're sharing on social media not because we want to give people information, because we want to connect. We want to feel linked to others. This is a normal human thing. And that's why social media has its hooks in us. If we can use that for good, we need to think about how we can partner with companies to build in reminders, checks, just like Gmail or others say. If you say, here's your attachment, I want to send my email, but you don't put an attachment, the AI will say, hey, you mentioned attachment, are you sure you want to send? The same, there have been interesting trials on, you're about to send what many people have flagged as misinformation. Are you sure you want to send? Even that tiny bit of friction can help reduce the likelihood of spreading disinformation. As far as the person who is blind but doesn't want to see, I'm not saying that information, attitude, knowledge isn't important. It's fundamental. Our education systems are fundamental. My point is that we're not leveraging the opportunity of context enough. Our gut, our first reaction is we need to educate, we need to inform, we need to persuade. But sometimes we just need to make it easier. So in addition to the great amount of learning development and other work out there that we need to tap into with regard to building fact-based approaches, we need to think about what is that person, what's the user journey of the person that we're trying to work with, the community, and where are the friction points along the way that lead to the behaviors we don't want to see, and most likely the behaviors they don't want to see. Final answer is, you have to work with what you can work with, and this is not a panacea or a silver bullet. It's not a solution factory. It's an approach that helps us be more likely to design more effectively, and we need to look at it from many, many different angles. And I'm sure that I have just as much to learn from your experiences, and maybe we could talk after the conference as well, because each context is different.
Muchísimas gracias por la respuesta.
Thank you so much for that response. And do we have time for any more questions? One last question, please. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Rowley from World Source Welfare. As I understand it, that scared straight example, the example had been exported to the US, to the UK, and into Europe as well before they actually found out it was actually doing exactly the opposite of what they're trying to do. We've heard over the last couple of days about the challenges, about sort of giving beer and avocados to working equids with colic, and a lot of these challenges have got multiple behaviours involved. So it's easy to see if you've got a single behaviour and you change that. What have you learned so far about when you've got sort of several different behaviours? How is it best to break them down so you can deal with them sequentially?
That's a really excellent question. There's a great tool we've been able to experiment with that's by Steve Wendell called Cascade Funnel, and it does help you sequence out or actually map behaviors. And I don't know of any way to, let's say, figure out where to put more of your efforts or where not. But the way I look at it is, the really heavy lifting is on the educational, informational, and knowledge side. The opportunistic kind of behavioral scientist looks at where's the biggest friction that is kind of easily removed. So a lot of the times we're looking at low-hanging fruit that may not change the world, but it will help with a small change that's contributing to a larger thing. So we need to fight our all or nothing kind of mentality. Oh, this small change isn't going to have a huge impact, and do many, many, many small changes. The second thing I would say is we can't underestimate the power of co-design. So unlike a very top-down approach, which we have traditionally in many places, what do we know better as scientists that they need to do? We're bringing a toolkit and an approach to a community, and then we're sharing it. We're asking questions, we're partnering. We're not saying we know your problem, we're saying tell us your problem. And in that respect, that process, the cascade you talked about, there probably will filter out from that very complexity critical problems that the community itself wants to work on first. And I think that we need to trust a lot of times the interests of the community and the problems they see as major before we can then start to make some asks of what perhaps some of the more natural science tells us we need to change.
Muchas gracias. Muy bien, pues de nuevo muchas gracias al señor Cortney.
Thank you, Courtney. We are going to continue with, a round of applause. Yeah, thank you.